Hi, Carolyn. This is Ira. I am recording here my audio feedback on your statement of belief. And even though we've already really kind of talked through a lot of what I have to say here, I'm recording it anyways, just in hopes it'll be helpful to have that audio just as you're doing your final moments of revision on the major essay, Defining Good Arguments in Digital Contexts. So, like I said, we've talked about some of the sort of responses that I have to the statement of belief already, but I hope it might be helpful to have them recorded in this format as well. And to be clear, my responses here are not evaluative of the statement of belief. It's a great statement of belief. It's thoughtful and well considered. Rather, my comments here are meant to highlight some of the things that I think you're saying that are compelling or particularly well said, and also to name some of the ways in which I want to encourage you to be more systematic, or to places where I want to push you a little bit. So, with that in mind, start off defining argument, following the dictionary. This is in terms of reasons, statements, or facts in series, and not just any series, a coherent series, intended to support or establish some point of view. And that you take that as your beginning point, but then immediately say that a good argument is not simply a coherent discussion. Rather, it's a conversation, and a specific kind of conversation is one that takes place in a welcoming environment in which both participants treat one another with respect and truly hear as well as consider one another's perspectives in order to promote new ways of thinking and different points of view to consider. So you start off right off the bat here by taking a definition from the dictionary. Using a definition for the dictionary that highlights or focuses on supporting or establishing a point of view that has that kind of conflictual or tension in it. And then you immediately move to moderate that by saying, but it's not just that. It has also to do with the welcoming environment, it has to do with respect, truly hearing, considering perspectives, and all of it is for a goal. The goal is to promote new ways of thinking and different points of view to consider. So, obviously, I love all that. I think it's great. But some of it kind of falls away along the way. So you talk about, and I'm going to sort of note some of the ways in which I want to encourage you to account more fully for the competitive characteristic or the contestatory characteristic of argument. So you start off by saying, bad argument is not a yelling contest. So we want to move past being based solely on emotions. We want to move past loud voicedness and great passion and so on and so forth, and get to something that is not all this. And you see that as being based on the mentality of the participants, and specifically an openness to learn from one's opponent. So I want to just kind of recap the idea that if good argument is about promoting new ways of thinking and different viewpoints, and it seems like one of the things that's happening in this first page is, on the one hand, you're acknowledging that there is one has an opponent, there's contestation, there's conflict. And you're saying, at the same time, it's also about respect and openness and not merely talking over each other, so on and so forth. And I buy all that. But what I want to encourage you to do is make sure that you're weaving it all together coherently, so that these sort of two things that are in tension or at odds all fit in one single articulation of what good argument is. And obviously for the major essay, specifically what good argument in digital contexts is. A lot of that gets us into domains where there's not really yelling per se. It's not, we're not interpersonally communicating a lot of the time in digital contexts in quite the same ways that we do face to face, but there's something happening that has some of the same kinds of problems and some of the same kinds of values and benefits, but also plays out differently. So I just want to make sure that in that major essay, you're thinking about how it plays out differently as well. How openness, what openness looks like in situations where there's lots of different voices, where it's hard to even track all the voices in an argument. What mutual understanding looks like if there's 50 people commenting and they are arguing, but they're only sort of all on the same page about what they're even arguing about. Is mutual understanding possible? If so, and thus good argument is possible, how does that reshape the definition? And if not, what do we do with that? How do we employ tactics or strategies of good argument as you define it in digital contexts? How do we, another way of asking that is, how do we practice a learning mentality in which we're willing to compromise or at least truly consider opponents' perspectives in contexts where we may not be able to rely on that from our argument partners, or in contexts where we may be seeking to persuade or speak to people who are not participants in the actual argument, but are part of the audience that we have in our mind. You can imagine having an argument with somebody on Facebook where you have some other audience in mind that's not really the person you're arguing with. When that happens, can that be good argument? If so, how does that impact your definition? And if not, why not? And then I think the way that you talk about what's at stake in the words being educated is really good. I think you speak very coherently about this. And this framing of it as the words spoken during an argument must be educated, I think is really interesting. A lot of people think in terms of like they must be factual or they must be correct, etc. And that's a pretty high standard because we don't even all agree about what counts as factual. But so this idea that the words must be educated, in other words, what we do when we argue, this is what I take you to be saying, has to be coming from a space of not simply a naive belief or opinion that hasn't been thought through or tested in some way. We have to be educated, and you go through to say that doesn't necessarily mean educated in college, although it can, but it just means that the participants in an argument have to have some form of substantive experience. Maybe it's a personal experience of sexual assault. It is a way of speaking from a position of really having something educated to say. Maybe it's having studied the relevant material on PTSD in the psychological literature, whatever, regarding the specific argument. But the idea is, this is the point I take you to be making, and I think it's a good one. The idea is good argument is educated, and that somehow is maybe not quite the same as being correct per se. And I'd be interested to hear you say more about the relationship between argument that's educated and argument that's fact-based. Are they the same thing? If they're different, how are they different? If they're the same, how are they the same? And my sense is that they're different, actually, that you're saying something that's more about where we should be coming from as arguers than you are about the epistemic, that is to say, the knowledge-bearing character of our assertions. That is, I take you to be saying here that what we do when we argue, and when we argue well, is we produce words that are educated rather than correct. I mean, ideally, we're hoping they're correct, but we can't really know that off the bat. But we can know that we're saying something that's educated or not. Anyways, I think you're saying something really interesting here, basically. It's what I'm trying to reflect back, and I hope you'll expand on that a little bit in the major essay. Think that through a little bit more in the major essay, or keep thinking it through in the major essay. And this is one of the things that you do here that I think is kind of cool is you're also trying to think through what are some of the ways in which one-on-one arguments can work well in digital context, and you just start to think about that. And I strongly encourage you, obviously, for the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts essay, to trace that out more fully, to think more about how what's best in a one-to-one scenario can be reenacted or recreated in digital contexts, and also how goodness in digital contexts might be different from goodness in interpersonal interaction. And if it is, what those differences look like and what they do for your definition. Here, I'm a little interested. This seems like maybe a pretty high bar. So if an argument's going to be good, it must end with both parties feeling that they have learned something new or gained an appreciation for a different insight. I mean, it's a high bar. Everybody has to feel that way? Is it possible that one person feels that way and the other person doesn't? Does that mean that it wasn't a good argument, or that one of the people's arguments weren't good but the others were? What about such situations? Now, also, I want to be, caution you again. Let's not get hung up on both parties. Let's think in terms of, multilateral arguments. Arguments often have many different parties, especially in digital contexts. But regardless, so let's think about it with multiple people. But so a discussion is successful if all the participants are able to leave the discussion feeling that their point of view was truly heard and considered. It should never end in anger or upset. And I wonder, I don't know, I think about my own life and arguments that I've had, and I've definitely had arguments where I walked away mad. But something about the way the other person made their argument really made me reconsider things over a longer stretch of time. So even though I left the argument, the interaction, whether it's personal, like face-to-face or online in some way, feeling kind of upset, the words, the discourse the other person produced still kind of percolated in me. And later I, changed my mind in some ways or understood their perspective better. And to me, that seems like a good argument. I don't know that you would have to agree, you might not, and that's perfectly fair. But I would encourage you to think about moments where people leave an argument not feeling like their point of view was heard and considered, and where it might be good. And to say a little bit more about if it can be good there, what does that mean for your definition? And if it can't be good there, why not? What is at stake here? Why does it matter? Who cares? And in answering that and working that through, of course, go back to your definition. When you say a good argument is not born from anger or upset, again, I kind of wonder, is that necessarily true? Don't we sometimes have conversations that start in anger and end in resolution? Would those not be good arguments? And if so, why not? Or if they are, how does that make you rethink some of the ideas here? So I really appreciate the way that you're thinking about this and the statement of belief. And a lot of this kind of goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in office hours. I think you're thinking about argument in ways that are very humane, that I'm personally very sympathetic to. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter what I think. What matters is that you think about argument in ways that are also systematic and can account for the full spectrum, or as much of the spectrum as possible, since this is the goal of theory making. So I'm really looking forward to reading your Defining Good Arguments in Digital Context essay. Like I said, I enjoyed reading your statement of belief, and I look forward to reading you more soon. I hope these thoughts are helpful, even though they kind of cover territory we've talked through a fair bit already anyhow, but I hope they may be useful in your final moments of revising. And thanks. I'll talk to you later.